Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today we're going to April 12th, 1864, the attack on the U.S. garrison of Fort Pillow along the Mississippi River. It's one of the most controversial battles of the entire Civil War. The attack by Nathan Bedford Forrest's Confederate cavalry ended with a rout of the garrison's 600 soldiers. When the Union soldiers tried to surrender, Forrest's troops reportedly shot the men down in the act of trying to surrender. Primary source accounts on both sides described the bloodbath that followed. And when it was all over, 221 Union soldiers lay dead, another 130 wounded. That's more than half the garrison. On the Confederate side, Forrest's cavalry numbered about 200 casualties, and there were an estimate of 1,500 to 2,500 men engaged. The illustration here is the cover from the May 7th, 1864 issue of Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper. It's part of the collection of the Library of Congress. As you students of photography in the Civil War know, photography wasn't mature enough as a technology to provide the immediate images of actual battles. And so illustrators, war artists relied on eyewitness accounts and other descriptions to inform the illustrations that they made. And that explains what you're seeing here. The Northern press labeled the atrocities of Fort Pillow as the Fort Pillow Massacre. Confederates denied that they murdered their enemy soldiers, many of whom were black. On the Northern side, on the United States side, the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War launched an immediate investigation. Senator and Committee Chairman Benjamin Wade of Ohio and Representative Daniel Gooch of Massachusetts went on a tour of Tennessee, Illinois, and Kentucky and interviewed 50 witnesses. They also moved rapidly, super fast. They published a report within 3 weeks of launching the investigation, and the results of those interviews were damning. In fact, it's rather difficult to read the report. I've included a link here below in the text field to be able to read it for yourself. Over the last 160 years, numerous historians have supported the findings, have done their own studies, and come to largely the same conclusion that there were Union soldiers who were shot in the act of surrendering or after they surrendered. The eyewitness testimony in the report is, as I mentioned, is definitely incredibly moving, and it's vivid. One of the most damning accounts in the entire report that I found comes from a man named Jacob Thompson. He served as a cook in Company K of the 11th Illinois Infantry. The colonel of the 11th was Thomas E.G. Ransom, a name that some of you may know from your Civil War research. He had been wounded a week earlier in another battle. In vivid and graphic terms, Thompson describes what he saw and how he came to be where he was. I want to read it to you. And so let's get into it. Thompson is described as a colored man, it's in parentheses, and he's sworn and examined by Congressman Gooch. So let's go through the questions and answers. Question: were you a soldier at Fort Pillow? No, sir. I was not a soldier, but I went up to the fort and fought with the rest. I was shot in the hand and the head. When were you shot? After I surrendered. How many times were you shot? I was shot but once, but I threw my hand up and the shot went through my hand and my head. Who shot you? A private. What did he say? He said, "God damn you, I will shoot you, old friend." Question: did you see anybody else shot? Yes, sir. They just called them out like dogs and shot them down. I reckon they shot about 50, white and black, right there. They nailed some black sergeants to the logs and set the logs on fire. When did you see that? Asked Mr. Gooch. Answer. When I went there in the morning, I saw them. They were burning altogether. Did they kill them before they burned them? No, sir. They nailed them to the logs, drove the nails right through their hands. How many did you see in that condition? Some 4 or 5. I saw 2 white men burned. Question. Was there anyone else there who saw that? I reckon there was. I could not tell who. Question. When was it that you saw them? Answer. I saw them in the morning after the fight. Some of them were burned almost in 2. I could tell they were white men because they were whiter than the colored men. Question. Did you notice how they were nailed? Answer. I saw one nailed to the side of a house. He looked like he was nailed right through the wrist. I was trying then to get to the boat. That's the gunboats and the escape vessels that they attempted to leave the area of Fort Pillow and get on the Mississippi River. I was trying then to get to the boat when I saw it. Did you see them kill any white men? They killed some 8 or 9 there. I reckon they killed more than 20 after it was all over, called them out from under the hill and shot them down. They would call out a white man and shoot him down, and call out a colored man and shoot him down, do it just as fast as they could make their guns go off. Question. Did you see any rebel officers about there when this was going on? Answer. Yes, sir. Old Forrest was one. Did you know Forrest? Yes, sir. He was a little bit of a man. I'd seen him before at Jackson. Question. Are you sure he was there when this fighting was going on? Yes, sir. Question. Did you see any other officers that you knew? I did not know any other but him. There were some 2 or 3 more officers came up there. Did you see any buried there? Answer. Yes, sir. They buried right smart of them. They buried a great many Secesh and a great many of our folks. I think they buried more Secesh than our folks. Question. How did they bury them? They buried the Secesh over back of the fort, all except those on Fort Hill. Them they buried on top of the hill where the gunboats shelled them. Question. Did they bury any alive? Answer. I heard the gunboat men say they dug 2 out who were alive. You did not see them? No, sir. What company did you fight with? I went right into the fort and fought there. Question. Were you a slave or a free man? I was a slave. Where were you raised? In Old Virginia. Who was your master? Colonel Hardgrove. Where did you live? I lived 3 miles the other side of Brown's Mills. How long since you lived with him? Answer. I went home once and stayed with him a while, but he got to cutting up and I came away again. Question. What did you do before you went into the fight? Answer. I was cooking for Company K of Illinois Cavalry. What he meant to say, I think, was the Illinois Infantry. I cooked for that company nearly 2 years. Question. What white officers did you know in our army? Answer. I knew Captain Milltop. It's not a name I could track down. And Colonel Ransom. And I cooked at the hotel at Fort Pillow, and Mr. Nelson kept it. I and Johnny, he doesn't give a last name, were cooking together. After they shot me through the hand and head, they beat up all this part of my head, the side of his head, with the breech of their guns. So there you have the eyewitness testimony of Jacob Thompson, who served as a cook in the Union Army. He describes being shot, 1 shot through the hand and into his head. He describes being beat up, clubbed with a musket. He describes the deaths of various white and black soldiers. He describes some soldiers being burned, nails being driven through their hands and their wrists, and logs in the side of a building. Brutal testimony, and one of 50 accounts that were gathered as part of the investigation into the battle by the Congress. Again, I mentioned you can read this report. I've included the link below, so do check it out. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.